All right, fellow humans, we got to do this. I cannot put it off any longer. The time is now. This is Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast, and my name is Jay Brown, and for the first time in a while, I don't actually feel like doing this so much right now. I got to admit it. Those of you who've been listening for a while, you might remember it's happened before, not in a long time, but every once in a while, I don't feel like recording one of these intros, but I still have to because the episode's got to come out. The show must go on. And I've been putting it off, and there's no more putting it off. So here we are, we're doing it. And my mood is what my mood is. The reason I feel like I'm not in such a great place to speak with you is just that sometimes I can veer into a little bit of a brood or sort of a more despondent place when I'm working through something. And I don't always want to bring that in. I don't want to be like a bummer before you listen to this very cool episode with Danny Paradise today. But those of you who've been listening for a long time know that I feel like when I do these intros, I got to be honest with what's going on. And the truth is, right now, I'm feeling a little stressed out, mainly about money. It's partly because I got this email from my hosts in Japan. I'm leaving for Japan on Wednesday. It's a big trip. It's 12 days in Japan. It's like 14-hour flights. You know, it's a big thing. I've done it many times. I've recorded from Japan. I'll be coming to you from Japan next week, I think. But it's always a long haul, and it's a lot of work. And it's usually a good chunk of change, enough to make it worthwhile. But I got an email that said that the numbers were down. And it's not like that hasn't happened before. There's ebbs and flows with numbers. There's like a lot of different reasons. But it's the first time I'm taking the trip since the big move, you know? And I was kind of counting on it being at least usual, you know? Not like the best numbers I've ever gotten, but not like the worst. And I mean, it might get a little bit better before I arrive, but still it's a little bit like, oh, fuck, really? Shit. And I think it wouldn't be as bad, that news in and of itself, if it wasn't for also something that happened yesterday, which was such a mix. You see, this really cool thing happened for me yesterday, which was that I hung out with a new friend, like a man who's of my similar age who I met and thought was interesting, and we decided to like hang out, and that just hasn't happened for me. I don't have like buds that live where I live. I have friends that I knew back when that I was tight with, but we've gone in separate directions and we're still close, but we don't live near each other. So I can't remember the last time I just like hung out with like a buddy or like a friend, like socially like that. For the 10 years that I had this center, I never hung out like that. And a couple weeks ago, the owner of one of the yoga centers that I teach at in Bethlehem, the Yoga Loft, she brought her husband to my class, and he was just a really interesting guy. He seemed like a cool guy. We had a good practice. After class, we got to talking, and he said, hey, you know, if you ever want to hang out sometime. And I said, yes, I would love that. I don't really have any friends around here, and I'm new to the state. And so we exchanged numbers, and, you know, that was that. And then it's been a few weeks, and then at the beginning of this week, he texted me saying, you want to get together at the end of the week? And I was like, yes, I would love that. Let me check with my wife. Of course, I had to check with her and kind of scheduled a time that we would get together. And then it was so funny when I was getting ready to leave, my eldest daughter was like, where's Dad going? And my wife said, oh, he has a play date. I thought, that's right. I have like a man play date. And so I met my new friend, Franco, at a local pub, Porter's Pub here in Easton. And it was so funny because when I got there, Franco had already befriended the drunk guy at the bar. I'm sure you've gone to a bar when there's that one guy who's had too much to drink and he's being just a little bit too loud, enough that he's making people around him uncomfortable, and nobody really wants to deal with him. Well, when I got there, Franco had already befriended that guy, and they were sort of chumming it up, and I was like, whoa, okay. And as soon as I sat down, he was like, what's up? He was like loud and like aggressive and sometimes saying offensive things, although he seemed like a nice guy, and it was sort of this wild mix. So we get to talking eventually, and throughout our conversation, which was great, and my instinct was totally right, such an interesting guy and totally easy to like engage with. He was born in Kenya, and he's got a degree in computer engineering, and he's working on like a new platform with like a collective model. And I was like, I'm totally into that. And we were totally hitting it off. And the drunk guy kept interjecting and trying to be a part of the conversation. And we were kind of laughing about it and having fun and letting him be a part of it, even though like he was cussing really loud, and like the bartender was almost going to ask him to leave at one point. But during that conversation, when the drunk guy learned that I was a yoga teacher, he said, "You're a yoga teacher? You don't look like a yoga teacher." and then he said, "Can you actually make a living at that?" And I have to admit, I had to hesitate for a moment before I said, well, yeah, I've been doing it for the last 20 plus years now. So yeah, it's possible. And he was like, wow. He was like just shocked. And I think that the combination of that moment where, the issue of the plausibility of yoga as a livelihood, in combination with getting the email from Japan that the numbers were going to be down, I don't know, it sent me in like a not great direction. And, I've got a couple of things in the works that could pan out, and who knows, you just never know how these things go, and I'm not like in dire straits, but it's a hustle, man. And it's a hustle for everybody. It's a hustle for the big names too. I guess some people got some sweet deals somewhere along the way, but as far as I can tell, it's a bit of a grind, and you do it because you love it. It's not like I wouldn't be just as inspired to teach to 3 people as I would to teach to 30 people. But I need to make fucking money. Sucks. So there you go. I just spilled all my shit out on you. Sorry to do that. Sorry to Danny Paradise, who is on the podcast today. Let's talk about that, because we have a really cool, interesting conversation to listen to together. I don't know if you know who Danny Paradise is. I know a lot of you who've been around for a while know exactly who Danny Paradise is, but I'm betting that there's a lot of folks listening who maybe don't know so much about him. He was a very early adopter, as you will hear. I think one of the early Ashtanga teachers in the West. Started out in Hawaii, but has been international. And along the way, he's also a musician. He ended up hooking up with some pretty celebrity students. And we didn't really go into that. I knew he had some celebrity students, but I kind of decided that I didn't want to be like, hey, tell me what it was like to teach Sting, I didn't want to be that guy. I didn't want to be finding out about the celebrities. I wanted to find out about him and talk about what happens with yoga, because that's really my interest. So I sort of made a decision that I wasn't gonna go there so much. He does mention it at one point, but I purposefully sort of didn't go there. But he's had some really big students. Let me read you the list. Sting, Madonna, Paul Simon, Edie Brickell, Graham Nash, Eddie Vedder, Mickey Hart and Bob Weir, and John McEnroe, and Luciano Pavarotti. Those are all people that he has taught yoga to at one time or another. I know I think he kind of toured with Sting for a while or something like that. But in any case, it's just wild that I managed to even track him down to talk to him. I don't know him. We don't really have so mutual friends necessarily. I just was sort of curious to see if I could find him, and I went to his website and I sent him an email, and he did get back to me, but it was like months ago because he's like traveling. He's like all over the place. And then I'm not even sure, but sort of randomly out of nowhere, he got back to me. He was like, hey, you want to do it? And I was like, yes. And we sort of randomly managed to sync up with time. And I think from the sound of it, I don't know this, I think he was like actually like walking around outside at some point in Hawaii while I was talking to him. I don't know. He's just a really kind of quirky way that I ended up landing into this conversation with Danny Paradise. And we go all kinds of interesting places. So you're going to get to hear that today. Before you do, let me mention that this episode of Yoga Talks is sponsored by Karmasoft, your complete online yoga studio management solution. And for those of you who've listened to the podcast before, you know I've talked about Karmasoft. I had the founder of Karmasoft, Rudy Senecal, on the podcast back in October 2017. That's episode 84 if you want to go back and listen to it. I used Karmasoft at my yoga center for 8 years until I closed down this past fall. And it's just a fantastic tool for anybody who's running a yoga center or managing a yoga center, or could be a fitness place or Pilates place. It doesn't matter. But if you've got to register classes, if you've got to schedule teachers, and if you need to run accounting reports, and you want something that's done in a way that is completely in line with the needs of a teacher who wants to actually relate to students and not be looking at the screen to figure out how to get the shit into Mind Body Online or whatever, well, Karmasoft is the answer. I really can't recommend it enough. Check it out at karmasoftonline.com. Let me also mention my stuff. I've got some upcoming gigs. I'm going to be in East Hartford, Connecticut, April 8th. I'm going to be in Fishkill, New York, April 14th. I'm going to be in Falls Church, Virginia, April 27th through 29th. I am going to be in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, May 5th and 6th. How about that? And I am also going to be doing a training here locally in Easton, Pennsylvania from May 12th through June 30th. And if anybody listening to this is local and is interested in doing like some more serious like teacher training stuff with me, this is a rare opportunity. I managed to work out a space arrangement with the center, one of the centers I'm teaching at. And I figured out a way to do 7 Saturdays between May 12th and June 30th. And then the rest of it is all mentorship stuff. We work it out between you and me. So if you're interested in that, or finding out about any of those other gigs, or listening to the archives of this podcast, or reading my blog, or finding my online yoga video offerings, you can find all that stuff at jbrownyoga.com. Also, maybe if you're enjoying the podcast, you do us a solid and show us some support. Go to a blog or podcast page and make a direct donation, or go to Apple Podcasts and iTunes and write a review and give us some stars. We'd so appreciate it if you did that stuff. But really, I am just very grateful to you for listening. And I am going to touch base with you on the other side because I've got some very interesting and exciting things to tell you about that are happening with upcoming guests. But for now, let's go ahead and listen to this talk that I had with Danny Paradise. All right, well, are you like settled? Do you need to get anything? You get some water or do anything or anything like?
I think I'm good. We could slowly start and see what happens.
Well, all I would say is that I'm talking to Danny Paradise, which is a pretty amazing thing. I've heard your name from forever, and your name's come up on this podcast before. Diane Bruni in specific comes to mind, mentioned you. You played a role.
She's a lovely girl.
Yes, and
a great teacher.
Yes,
and very innovative, of course.
Yes, she's moving in all kinds of interesting directions, and she just mentioned the role that you played for her. And
okay, I hope it was a good one.
It was. She spoke very highly of you. I've never heard anything but good stuff about you. You seem worried, but I don't think you have anything to be worried about.
Oh, you don't. But this is a crazy time, and there's some nasty people out there, and and it's things get distorted very quickly.
Well, we're not trying to distort anything. I'm just interested to talk to you because I have actually, I think I mentioned in an email to you, been in your class once in my life. And it's very deep in my mind because, I grew up in Los Angeles and then I moved to New York. And I've always had a little bit, since I moved away, a bit of an estranged relationship with my brother. He stayed in LA. And I came back to visit him, and I had gotten really into yoga in New York. And then when I went to visit him, he said, "Oh, I'm taking this yoga class." And I said, "Really?" I was like really surprised that my brother was taking a yoga class. And he took me to this class, and it was your class. I think it was like at your apartment. Like, I remember it like in Malibu or one of the canyons. It was like...
Topanga?
Yeah, Topanga Canyon. Absolutely.
Okay.
So is that... I'm trying, and so I took this one class with you, and frankly, all I was trying to do was impress my brother the whole time. But I remember that you were there, so that's got to be like in the '90s, maybe. I don't know, 95. Does that sound right? Were you in LA in '95 or '96?
Yeah, I was passing back and forth for a few years there.
Between what and what? Between LA and what?
LA and the rest of the world.
I see. So you're.
But I was in LA first in 1978 or 79, and I taught at the Center for Yoga. I gave some classes there, and I was introducing Ashtanga yoga in LA.
I see. In 1979.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. So, how much earlier than that did you come to Ashtanga yoga?
I started in 1976 on May 2nd in Hawaii with David Williams and Nancy Gilgoff.
I see.
Who were the first Ashtanga teachers in the West. And also, of course, David and Nancy were advanced practitioners. David knew all the sequences of Ashtanga yoga when I met him, and he was practicing them. And they were amazing, lovely teachers who became incredible friends and still are.
Yeah. And so you met them in Hawaii, you said?
On May 2nd, 1976. Or maybe it was May 1st. They did a demonstration in a little historic prison there, the Seamen's Prison. Had a beautiful grassy area, and it was open to the public, and they gave a demonstration, and about 35 people came, and then the next day they offered to start teaching, and everybody showed up.
And how old were you at that time?
I was 23.
And what were you doing in Hawaii at age 23? Did you grow up there, or what brought you there?
I had started visiting my brother in Honolulu. He'd moved there from Canada, and I had visited him in 1968, and then again on a round the world trip when I was 20. I stopped in to see him, and then I came back a year later, and I was playing music in Hawaii and some clubs there, and then I ended up going to Maui after a little while, a couple of years later, and was playing music there, and then I got an invitation through a couple of friends, very close friends that I'd met, to come to this yoga demonstration.
And was that your first ever exposure to yoga, that demonstration?
That was absolutely. I'd heard of it. A couple of friends were doing it when I was growing up, but I hadn't really checked it out. They were telling me it was really interesting at the time, in Canada, but this was my first actual seeing what yoga could be, or the actual physical practices, and how actually extraordinary they were, because the demonstration that they did was first, second, third, and fourth series, essentially.
Yeah.
For a group of people. It was 3 people, David Williams, Nancy Gilgoff, and Marcia Heidelman, who was one of their students. So they did this demonstration, and we had a talk afterwards, and everybody was kind of overwhelmed because nobody had seen anything quite like it before.
What were your thoughts? Do you remember? What was your impression when you first saw that? Was it? I mean, did they do kind of when you say they did a demonstration? How much of the series did they do? Was it like a choreographed?
Yeah, well, I think Marcia did first series, and Nancy was doing second, and David was doing elements of third and fourth. But I don't remember exactly how long it was. Probably wasn't the whole series. Maybe it was, a little. But it was, it might have been an hour or something like that. I came a little late. I missed some of it. But,
yeah.
So don't quote me on anything.
No, I totally,
But, everybody was overwhelmed, and the next day they started teaching, and it was, they had a couple of criteria if you came to the class, and if you agreed to their criteria, then you could take classes with them.
Interesting. The criteria, you had to agree to some things? What was that?
You had to give them all your possessions. No, I'm kidding.
That's what I'm saying. I'm like, what's the criteria?
No, you had to agree to come every day, 6 days a week, at the prescribed time. It was outside. They started in that Seamen's prison, and it gradually moved outside to the library, in front of the library at the harbor, a little grassy area. You had to come every day and commit to coming for a month. And even if you didn't, want to do yoga, you had to show up. And, you didn't have to...
that was part of it? You could show up and not do it? You just had to show up?
Yeah, you just had to agree that you were going to try to do this thing for a month and see what happened. And then they were asking for a small donation. Nobody had any money at the time. Nobody lived anywhere. Everybody in that group was living on the beach, sleeping on the beach, and I think one person had a place to live. My friend John, he was living in his van, and I actually was sharing a house. So I actually was living in a place at the time, but everybody was, and I had slept on the beach there for a while, but there wasn't enough housing at the time for all the young people that were coming over from all over the world. So, but everybody was really, it was a wild group. And they were amazing teachers, and everybody, I would say, who started that day on May 2nd, most of them I seem to feel are still around, and they're all practicing yoga.
Wow. Well, first of all, I really relate. I know before I got into yoga, I was doing the starving musician thing myself.
Oh, okay.
Like a self-taught bass player, and then at some point, I sort of felt like I would play a late night show on a Wednesday night and have to teach a Thursday morning class. And at a certain point, the yoga was making me feel a lot better, and I just sort of went in that direction.
That's great.
Yeah.
But I hope you're still playing music.
I do.
Oh, well, there you go. You don't have to ever give that up.
No, it's like a pure joy. One of the few. And so you're in Hawaii, you see this mind-blowing demonstration, and you're on board. You commit. You're like, I'm on board. I'll show up for a month.
Mm-hmm.
Does that just take off from there? Do you automatic? A lot of people who come on this podcast say that once they start practicing, it just becomes a thing. Oh, that's definitely something that's going to be my thing.
Oh, well, it took a little while, but they taught very slowly. and very carefully. And the first day, they simply showed us the first salutation of the Ashtanga sequence, and then we did it, I think, 3 times, and then we did the finishing poses and rested for 15 minutes.
That was day one.
That was day one. And then the next day, you would repeat that, and if you wanted, you did 5 salutations. And then they finished. And then you rested. And then the next day, they added on the second salutation. We did 1 or 2 of the second salutation, and then finished. And then so it went like that. Every day they would add on 2 or 3 positions if you wanted, if you were feeling like it. But the thing that hit me actually immediately was, the first salutation I did with them, I was in downward dog and I broke out into an intense sweat, and it was 10 seconds into the practice. And so immediately I knew this has never happened before. And this was something completely different. And of course, you feel muscles and ligaments and tendons that you're not usually working in other activities. And I had studied martial arts as a teenager, so I was a little bit disciplined, or had been disciplined. I took a karate class in Canada with the father of karate in Canada, Masami Soroka. And so I had at least been exposed to a level of movement and flexibility and strength that don't really receive in Western sports. I was into Western sports, and I'd done all kinds of sports and swimming and some gymnastics, but I think the karate actually really had prepared me to learn yoga.
Well, it's so interesting to hear you describe that month-long course, because I've heard that's how it was taught at one time, where it was very gradual, just little bit by little bit, not like primary series all on the first day. But most people who go to do Ashtanga today, it's all at once, all the first day.
Well, unless schools are hipper and they have introductory classes, which a lot of, the best schools do. They have, introducing...
Where they do the lead classes, and
They do lead classes, but, very slow and small, short, or at least... very comprehensive, and then gradually help people, go further into the sequences as they're ready. But if you just attend a class,
well, you see, for me, it's so crazy. I wrote this blog post last month that was just about this change in dynamics. I had a yoga center in Williamsburg for the last 10 years, and I got rid of it, and now I'm out there again, and it's incredible, how much I still had one foot and more like what you were describing, when it was kind of more of a commitment, and you were paying for school or something when you went to class. And today it's different. It's, like I said, it's a little more buying socks on Amazon or something. It's such a different dynamic, and this idea that you had to commit before you even started.
Yeah. Well, good schools still operate in they try to, I think, honor these ideas where it's safer if people learn slowly, and they have different levels of classes. I mean, a lot of the best schools do. They have introductory classes and level 1, level 2, and all these kind of things, and people gradually shift to other classes as they need to, or decide they want to keep exploring or expanding their practices. I mean, so for some people, learning a 15 or 20-minute practice is good enough. So it's up to an individual exploration.
Yeah, but if I pay for a 90-minute class, I want my 90-minute class, right?
Sure, but you might not come back the next day because you'll be laying in bed wondering what happened.
Right?
You've been hit by a truck.
I know, but that's what people want. People want to get hit by trucks.
Yeah, well, but eventually they discover that that's not what this is about, and that it's a therapeutic exploration, and everybody, of course, has different histories and situations and previous injuries or imbalances that they're learning how to correct, and good teachers kind of direct them in that way.
Yeah.
So the more experienced teachers, or the ones that have get deep insight into how the practice affects them. I mean, teachers have to be doing their own serious practice to understand how to pass it on properly and safely.
Mm-hmm. I would agree with that. All right, so how did the month go? By the end of the month, did you have like the full primary series down, or did you make it all the way through it, or?
Everybody in that group knew primary series at the end of the first month, and because we were in a very beautiful environment and surrounded by nature, and the classes were outside, then people picked it up very quickly, and it impacted everybody very, very fast, and people became. I think that's the science of the practice, or generally of the practice of yoga. If you become regular at it, you gain tremendous balance and strength and flexibility, and the body adapts very quickly, especially if you follow recommended suggestions, like the sequences of Ashtanga yoga or other sequences that have been around for thousands of years, or elements. Mm-hmm. So everybody learned very quickly, but we continued practicing with them for 6 months, and then they went to India.
Mm-hmm. Oh, they went to study with Pattabhi?
They would go back every 6 months.
I see.
And then, of course, but when they left that first time, everybody was a little nervous because, they'd been studying regularly with them, but the discipline was already in everybody's genes at that point, and so everybody kept going and learned that they could do it themselves. And that was the one reason that, in fact, that I really wanted to learn with them too, was because I was not into following a guru or being involved in any kind of guru tradition or authoritarian tradition, but I recognized, kind of like in karate, you could learn a form and practice it yourself, and that instantly appealed to me.
Well, Ashtanga in particular, it's a total self-practice tradition. Like once you learn the sequence, you know the sequence, you just do it Mysore style, or.
Absolutely. Yeah. So it was, but at the time in Maui, there were a lot of gurus coming through. It was a center for different spiritual teachers and ideas, and a lot of young people flocking to see all these different teachers and looking for their guru, and that I knew there was something fundamentally wrong about that for me, and this appealed to me because of that, because you didn't need the teacher, and after a while you recognized it was self-teaching. Uh-huh. So you learned tools to teach yourself, and then when they would come back. When they came back the next year, everybody in the group began learning second series, and they taught it. Well, they taught it slowly again. People had to do their primary series practice up to 2/3 of the way through to tortoise, and then they could start learning, adding second series on. And after a couple of months, everybody was doing second series, primary and second series, alternating. And then they left.
You wouldn't do both in the same time. Like, what would one day practice look like when you say doing both primary and secondary? What would it look like? You wouldn't do a full primary and full secondary all at the same time, would you?
For the first month, we went up. We did 2/3 first, and then gradually all of second. And then after the month, when everybody kind of knew second series, or at least had gone through it a number of times, or most of it, then we started alternating the series, standing first series one day, standing second series the next day, if you felt like it, as you felt. But they left again after 6 months, and they came back 6 months later, and then most of the group started learning third series.
Wow, and everybody just stuck around. How many people would you say were in this group?
35.
35, and everybody stuck around for these years while they would go back and go there and come back?
Absolutely, and we all became like super friends, and people started sharing houses together, and a year later I shared a house with David and Nancy, and we did yoga every morning, and that's how I learned fourth series.
Wow. See, that's just amazing to me. I mean, I don't know. I mean, you mentioned that you listen to some of the podcasts, but like most of the people who come on this podcast, we talk about stuff. It's like it's teacher trainings and like I'm always kind of fantasizing a little bit because I know, cause like when I came into it, there was still the glimmers of what you're kind of talking about. Where like when you wanted to learn yoga, you went and like lived with your teachers, you know, or you.
Well, we weren't planning on living together, but
I mean,
they found a house with a really cool guy who wanted to share it with as many friends as he could fit in the house, and so 7 or 8 of us all had rooms in this house, and we would do yoga his name was Ray. He was a lovely guy, and so we just lived together and studied yoga, and so it was quite cool. And
I mean, that seems to me like the best way to learn yoga, you know?
Well, if you like the people and they got a room available,
yeah.
Why not?
Excuse me. Yes. All right. So now how many years are we talking that you're there in Hawaii studying with them? And now you said you got through 4th series with them. Like, I don't know many people. Like, I blew a knee out trying to do 3rd series before I should have.
Uh-huh.
And I know very few people who've gotten even to it, like past the 2nd series. So you said you learned all the way through to 4th series. How long did you study with them, and how far through the 6th series did you get?
Oh, I've studied with them for 5 years, kind of, 6 months a year for the first 3 years. Then we lived together for a year and a half, something like that. And then, so it was about 5 years of kind of continuous exploration of the sequences.
Mm-hmm.
But most of the group were in their 20s. This was the first group in the West, certainly, that were starting to do the advanced sequences, and David and Nancy had taught in Encinitas, California, and there was 65 people there that had been practicing and were learning a lot of them were learning the advanced sequences too from teachers that they had trained after when they had left and come to Hawaii. So, we were kind of comparing notes because it was putting people through a lot of changes, and physical and mental and emotional, and of course, if they were excellent at being very careful, they didn't push on anybody. Except very, very lightly, and also if you had fatigued muscles or you pulled a muscle in the practice, you were asked to stop right there and just not go on, and that kind of protected people from having even more serious injuries.
And also, it just seems like when it's a gradual thing, and you're not like. It doesn't sound like you were trying. Were you like in your mind? Were you trying to get all the series? Because I kind of was. I was like, I want to be able to do them all or whatever. Like, got kind of competitive with it.
Well, there were certain movements that I was really inspired to be able to do, but then you discovered, okay, yeah, you'll be able to learn that movement, but there's like 60 moves that lead up to it, and you're going to have to be very, very carefully learn those to help inform the remaining, these kind of things that were super challenging and demanding. And of course, we learned you had to be very careful because the injuries were very severe if you didn't pay attention, and if you had ambition in the practice, to try to achieve something for that sake, then you discovered that was not the way to go, and that was in fact the way to create some serious problems.
Yeah, surefire.
So a lot of people had to go back to the beginnings. I had to go back to the beginning many times when I damaged myself or was, you're restructuring the body. I mean, that's what was happening. I came into it with not great posture, so and same with a lot of people, and so things restructure because you learn how to stand upright and have strong muscles and ligaments and tendons. It's an ancient system designed for the human race, but it has to be taken very carefully. slowly and with no ambition other than healing yourself.
Yes, indeed. And all right, so what I'm wondering now is that you mentioned that you weren't interested in like any kind of guru situation, but in Ashtanga, Pattabhi Jois was Guruji, and they kept going to see him and clearly had devotion to him. So what was your relationship to him at all? Did you ever meet him or practice with him?
I studied with him when he came to Encinitas in 1978 for a couple of months with a group of about 70 people in a big room, and then I met him again in Hawaii in 1980 for a couple of months.
And did you consider him your teacher, or did you look to them to be more your teacher?
No, I mean I saw the knowledge that he was carrying and respected that. But I had learned the sequences from David and Nancy and was very lucky to have had that input from them. And after I studied with him for that period of time, I recognized that it was absolutely not necessary for me to carry on anymore with him and nor to go to India and study with him. And that was from then on. I've just kept up my own practices and also have studied with all kinds of other teachers who have come from different lineages of practices and picked up techniques from them and incorporated those things in my practice. I was very lucky to, be very early in this and then meet great teachers all over the world that had come from other traditions, and we would do yoga together, and I'd started to learn all kinds of other things, aspects of yoga, including the philosophy and the...
I know. Well, that's what I'm always saying. It was such a smaller circle in a way at that time before it went like mainstream. It was like such a counterculture move. And I mean, you were back in the coming out of the 60s when it was first. But even when I came in much later than you, it still was always like this very counterculture move, and it was a commitment. It was like a thing that you really, you didn't just buy it,
Well, but all you had to do was do it, and then you realized how good it was for you. And so once you realized the importance and what it was giving you, what it was giving me personally, I knew I didn't want to stop. So that was very clear.
Well, I mean, I find it interesting that you did meet Pattabhi Jois, but you didn't necessarily take him on as your guru. And I'm wondering, I mean, I'm sure you've heard there's all kinds of stuff happening in that community right now. I'm sure you're aware, and people who have come out and talked and openly admitted at this point, Mary Taylor and Karen Rain, they've all put out public statements about inappropriate touching and behavior by Pattabhi Jois and people covering up. And I'm curious if there's anything you want to say about that. Were you aware of stuff? Is that why you were turned off from a particular reason, or what do you think? I think there's always this question of can you separate the teacher from the teachings? It seems to me you clearly would make the case that you can.
Absolutely. It's the message, not the messenger. The messenger, there's always something going on with the messenger. And, everybody has their own problems and own issues they have to come to terms with. And so when I first met him and we did classes, we saw what was going on. And after a while, I didn't want to be part of it personally. And so that's why I never went to Mysore. And also, if anybody ever asked me about going to Mysore, I told them the exact situation. And also, I studied karate when I was a child, and the teachers were very, very tough and hard. And that was the form that they came from. And Krishnamacharya was a really tough teacher. Pattabhi Jois was a really tough teacher, and I recognized that. They were trying to get across something very deep in the practices, but also, he had a gentleness to him, and Krishnamacharya too. But, there was a lot of intense adjustments. And I was in 1980, he had the first public advanced class, third series. And there was like 17 people from all over the world, and I attended that class. And, those moves are already as intense as it gets. And he would push people further. And, of course, help people learn the poses by pushing them into the poses. Now, if you were experienced and knew how to hold the internal locks and breathe very deeply when he came to you, and you essentially relaxed, then you wouldn't get injured. But for a lot of people in the other classes who didn't know that or understand it, people would get injured because they resisted or they were pushed too far. And so gradually, it became very clear that pushing was not essential, and because I already knew the sequences, I could push myself. Mm-hmm. I didn't need to go an extra few inches or feet.
Well, also as Ashtanga became more popular, like the people who were going were not necessarily learning the sequences in the same kind of incremental way that took over months and years,
Exactly, and they were coming from all kinds of. Everybody has issues, their previous injuries, surgeries, cancers, all kinds of conditions, scar tissue, sciatica, and every condition, cancer.
So
they're all coming to
you
the classes.
recognize that there was some issues. I mean, I'll say I've had Eddie Stern on the podcast, and he said the same as much, that even Sharad himself has changed things, and that you can go, and if you don't have to go to the back if you can't do it anymore, and you're allowed to rest, and you're allowed to make changes, and like they're not doing the same heart assists anymore, that there's been like an acknowledgement of what you're talking about that you recognized really early on.
Well, also, everybody saw all the things that were going on. There was no question about that. And if you wanted to participate, you kept studying. And if you didn't, you left. And
was there really a split?
It was voluntary.
Was there like those of the people who weren't okay with what was happening and those of the people who were?
Well, there were some that weren't okay with it, for sure.
Yeah.
And,
you were one of them, yeah.
I was just, it was clear to me. And also I was already not into following anybody.
Yeah, you said that.
That was apparent that, and I also, that was confirmed to me also by studying with Krishnamurti and attending a lot of his conferences.
So you spent time with Krishnamurti. When did that happen?
That happened from 1979 in Ojai, and then I was traveling all over the world a few years later teaching, and so I would catch him in Brockwood Park in England every August, and in just coincidentally in May of every year for a number of years, 5 or 6 years, in Ojai. I was turned on to him by Ganga White. Wow.
We heard about Krishnamurti and Brockwood from Eric Schiffman when he came on. We got to hear about what it's like to eat lunch next to Krishnamurti.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure the food was good. I'm sure everybody enjoyed the lunch. He was an amazing character. So he also, was very clear on the lack of necessity to follow anybody. True spirituality is freedom and independence and finding your own way in a compassionate, kind, loving way. And that's what yoga is about too.
I mean, that makes a lot of sense to me, that like if you see some not so great things happening in guru lineages, then you hang out with Krishnamurti, and you get that kind of, like you said, that non-dual self-empowerment thing where you get to take the determination, where you're the only one who can make any of the determinations.
Yeah, his thing was about freeing people, or contributing to their knowledge of freedom, and that just confirmed how I already was feeling and thinking, but of course he was incredibly eloquent and wise and a real world teacher. So it was, and he didn't want any following. Maybe people tried to follow him around, but he wasn't seeking followings. He was just trying to really set people free.
I mean, isn't that kind of what happened later? They propped him up pretty big, and then he didn't want it.
Well, that was earlier. That was when he was 30. Yeah.
Oh, so you met him much later. That's right.
I met him when he was in his 70s.
I see.
Or 8, maybe 7.
If you are hearing this message,
then you're listening to the free version of J. Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.